There's a moment most survival stories don't talk about. It's not the impact. It's not the storm. And it's not the moment the ship goes down. The real breaking point comes later. Experienced rescue crews have noticed the pattern for decades. Survivors often endure the initial disaster through pure adrenaline. In the first hours, people are focused, alert, and surprisingly functional. They follow procedures. They help each other. They believe rescue is coming. But then something changes, and it almost always begins on the second night at sea. When a vessel is lost offshore, the human body enters emergency mode. Adrenaline floods the system. Heart rate increases. Pain dulls. Fear sharpens attention instead of overwhelming it. In many ways, the first phase of survival is mechanical. The body is running on ancient programming designed to keep you alive through immediate danger. But adrenaline has a shelf life. By the time the second sunset approaches, the chemistry inside the body begins to shift. The surge that carried survivors through the chaos starts to fade. Fatigue moves in quietly. Dehydration begins to build. And the ocean, which looked survivable in daylight, starts to feel very different. Because darkness at sea is not normal darkness. It is total. On land, even at night, the brain can find reference points. Streetlights, trees, the horizon, something to anchor the mind. But in open water, especially miles offshore, the second night brings a kind of sensory deprivation that the human brain handles very poorly. The horizon disappears. The water becomes an endless black surface, and the survivor is left floating in a void with no visual boundaries. This is when the psychological phase of survival truly begins. Rescue reports from multiple maritime incidents describe the same progression. During the first daylight period, survivors tend to remain cooperative. They ration energy. They stay grouped together. Many even maintain cautious optimism. But after the second sunset, behavior often starts to fragment. Small decisions become harder. People begin to misjudge distance. Some report hearing things that aren't there: engines, voices, distant boats. This is not weakness. It is physiology. The human brain depends heavily on environmental feedback. When the senses are deprived, especially in darkness over open water, the brain begins to fill in the gaps. Fatigue amplifies the effect. Mild dehydration thickens the blood and reduces cognitive sharpness. Body temperature begins to drop, even in relatively warm water. And slowly, almost invisibly, the survivor's decision-making begins to degrade. This is what maritime psychologists sometimes refer to as the second night syndrome. Not an official medical diagnosis, but a very real pattern. One of the most dangerous elements is time distortion. Survivors frequently report that the second night feels dramatically longer than the first. Minutes stretch. Hours blur. The brain loses its normal sense of pacing. This matters more than people realize, because survival at sea is often a waiting game. And when the brain begins to lose its grip on time, patience collapses. That's when mistakes start. In several documented cases, survivors who remained calm during the first 12 hours began making high-risk decisions during the second night, attempting to swim for distant lights that were far beyond reach, separating from flotation, ignoring safety protocols they had followed earlier. It's not that they suddenly panicked. It's that their cognitive reserves were quietly draining. The ocean didn't change. Their biology did. Another factor working against survivors is what experts call cognitive fatigue under isolation. Humans are not designed to float alone in featureless environments for extended periods. The brain evolved with constant environmental input: sound, movement, landmarks, social feedback. Remove those long enough, and the mind begins to destabilize. This is why grouping together dramatically improves survival odds in maritime emergencies, not just for visibility, but for psychological stability. Conversation, even minimal interaction, helps anchor the brain to reality. Silence does the opposite. Temperature also plays a subtle but critical role. Even in water that feels tolerable at first, prolonged exposure steadily drains body heat. As core temperature drops, cognitive performance declines, judgment softens, reaction time slows, and the line between rational caution and dangerous decision-making begins to blur. By second night, many survivors are fighting a battle they don't even realize is happening inside their own bodies. Perhaps the most dangerous moment comes just before dawn of the second night. Rescue teams have observed that this window, the deep pre-dawn hours, often produces the highest rate of psychological collapse. Why? Because this is when exhaustion peaks. Hope begins to dip, and the body's chemical reserves are at their lowest point. It's the moment when the brain starts asking a very dangerous question: how much longer can this go on? The survivors who make it through this phase tend to have one thing in common. They simplify. They conserve. They focus only on the next small step instead of the overwhelming big picture. Stay afloat. Stay visible. Stay together. Wait for daylight. Because statistically, the second sunrise is often the turning point. Search and rescue operations heavily prioritize daylight sweeps. Visibility improves dramatically. Aircraft coverage expands. Surface detection becomes far more effective. In many cases, survivors who endure through the second night see their rescue probability rise sharply once morning arrives, but only if they are still physically and mentally intact enough to be found. This is why experienced offshore crews emphasize preparation so heavily. Not because problems are guaranteed, but because when things go wrong at sea, they rarely go wrong in simple ways. The first wave is mechanical. The second wave is psychological. And the ocean is patient enough to wait for both. The truth is, most people imagine survival at sea as a battle against the water. In reality, the longer the timeline stretches, the more the battle shifts inward, into fatigue, perception, and the quiet erosion of clear thinking. The second night doesn't always break survivors. But statistically, it is where the margin for error becomes very thin. If you boat offshore, preparation isn't about paranoia. It's about understanding how quickly normal human performance can degrade once the environment removes the signals your brain depends on. Because out there, the ocean doesn't have to be violent to be dangerous. Sometimes, it just has to be quiet long enough. Commander Puzzles, Ocean Survival Psychology Files.